Did you know it is much easier to get jacked if you can continue to train pain-free? Longevity is so underrated when it comes to our training because everyone focuses on the quick transformations, getting abs, getting big arms, but no one thinks about the quality of life that fitness will empower you to have long into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s if you train right. So in today's video, we're not going to talk any of the boring stuff like you don't have as much time as when you're in your teens to train when you get to age 30. We already know that stuff. We're going to talk the cool science, things that you can literally do right after watching this video to improve the longevity elements of your training so that you can continue to get incredible results and age like fine wine. Muscle is truly the anti-aging drug and money can't buy it. But time in the gym, consistency over years is how you will create the physique of your dreams and not just look jacked, but have the energy to crush the meetings, have the energy and the strength to play with your kids pain-free, and continue to create a fantastic quality of life for yourself as you age. Let's get right into it. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be without, it wouldn't go without saying that, how we organize our time and week as we get older, as more responsibilities come up, is super duper important. But I have already done videos on thinking about training splits, how to fit things into your schedule. So we're just going to talk exactly what to do in the gym to improve the longevity component of lifting after 30. And number one is exercise selection, because especially if you are above the age of 30, you're going to remember the times where the magazines were saying, you got to do squats for big legs, you got to do bench press for a big chest. And the fact is that there is nothing you have to do. A more nuanced approach to exercise selection will be really, really helpful because we don't all have the same, width of hip joint. That ball and socket doesn't look the same for everyone. We don't all have the same length of femur. We all have different biomechanics. So how a free weight squat looks on me will look completely different to how a free weight squat looks on you. Now, yes, there are a couple of things that you can do to learn how to manipulate those movement patterns. I do work on that with my clients because not everyone has access to incredible kit at the gym. So understanding the underpinning principles, understanding a little bit of these mechanics will be super important to make sure that you can make the most out of anything. And if you're a successful guy, maybe you can only get to the gym at 10 p.m. and get a little 30-minute workout in. So understanding how to get the most from the least is super duper important. The exact cues, the exact positioning, how to manipulate the mechanics to get what you want out of a certain exercise is really, really key. But my biggest beef with some of these basic movements is the fact that they're not basic at all. Because we don't have that external support and stability there, it means that we are very much at the mercy of our own mechanics. If we have certain length limbs, certain length torso, then the movement that is going to come more naturally to us will look quite different than maybe what we would want to create a specific response. Guys with longer femurs are typically going to lean over quite a lot when they're doing a squat. That's okay for our glutes and it'll strengthen our lower back a little bit more, but we're not going to get great quads. So especially when it comes to challenging the knee joint, we're not going to get much of a challenge there. We need to think outside the box. Not only that, but the fact that we don't have that stability there also makes these a very high skill requirement movement. And that means that it's much harder to train towards failure. It's very hard to train to the degree of intensity that you want to be training at to actually stimulate muscle growth, to stimulate adaptation. We know that mechanical tension is the key for muscle growth. And basically what that is when your muscles are trying to contract and that resistance is stopping them doing so. So when we have those super slow, grindy reps with good form, close to failure, that's what gives our body the signal to actually grow more muscle. So if we're falling out of balance doing squats or we're wiggling around uneven on a bench press, it's going to be much harder to execute the movement to the degree of intensity needed. So instead of having all that coordination, all that stability that you need to do for yourself, having something that's a little bit more stable, machines can be an incredible way to allow yourself to train with a much higher intensity. Along with that, they're also going to be much quicker to warm up on. You might not need quite as many warm-up sets on a movement because, again, that stability element is taken care of. So if we're now factoring in the logistics of the training, then you can be much quicker if you just have to put plates on, if you just have to knock the pin down on a machine instead of putting plates and figuring out exactly what weight you want to use with free weight exercises. So between the skill element, between the logistics, machines are great. And once again, they will take care of the mechanics side of things for us. If you are someone who is a very glute dominant squatter, maybe you've got very long femurs, then if you use something like, at the very least, a Smith machine, but even better if you've got something like a hack squat that's got a back support so you can't shift your hips back very much, or even better if you've got something like a pendulum squat where through that arcing motion it's actually going to help fold you up on that knee joint, then you're going to get a lot more quad, a lot more challenge to the knee, a lot more adaptation to the knees so you can actually take a little bit more force there, bigger quads so you can put the tension in the right places. This is all part of the exercise selection for efficiency. And if you're using exercises that are more efficient, that give you exactly what you want out of that exercise, you don't need to waste hours in the gym doing things that are getting you substandard results. You will actually get more from less, which means that you've got time for the other things that matter to you. You really can have it all. So exercise selection is going to be a real key point, and we're actually going to take that into a little bit more detail. But also, the cool thing about certain machines is that their resistance profile will be a little bit different. So if we think of something like a free weight squat, it's going to be the hardest down at the bottom. That's going to be where the line of force is going to be furthest away. So there's going to be a greater moment arm to the axis of rotation, basic physics. Now, if we think about where we typically get the most pain in a movement that has what we would call a descending profile, so that means that it starts the hardest, and as you go through the movement, squatting up, pressing the bar up off your chest, any of those kind of movements with a descending resistance profile, typically we get pain at the bottom because that's where the greatest challenge is. That's what makes the movement harder at the bottom. So if instead of a bench press where people often complain, my elbows hurt, my shoulders hurt, and also worth considering the fact that barbells will create a huge constraint, okay? Our hands are fixed at a certain width, so it takes a great degree of skill, a great degree of learning the placements to really optimize the setup to get what you'd want and spare your joints, okay? But if we imagine that instead of having something like that that's very, very heavy at the bottom, if we had something like those plate-loaded chest presses, the hammer strength ones, if you've ever used one, you know that the lockout is really, really difficult. And that means that there actually isn't quite as much tension at the bottom. So it can be great to spare your joints. There's a reason that you see a lot of competitive bodybuilders, especially the older guys, still hanging on to incredible gains by using machines. It can be very, very effective to use something with different mechanics to spare your joints. Next up, thinking about mobility, a completely different take on this, but to a degree it still factors in exercise selection, right? Mobility, we're thinking about the ability to be flexible whilst moving. That's the definition of mobility, okay? And naturally, there are certain positions, as I said, bottom of a squat, etc., that are typically going to be a little bit less comfortable. Now, I want you to do something for me. I'm actually going to zoom in on myself for those who are watching the video. I want you to raise your arms up to shoulder height out beside you. So like the top position of a lateral raise, but I want you to fold your arms so that your lower arm is basically pointing forward. So basically like you're standing up and doing a bench press, but you're not going like super deep, okay? And now I want you to actually externally rotate, turn your arms up. So now you'd be doing more of like a shoulder press kind of position, okay? How comfortably how far back can you get those arms? How far can you externally rotate them? Can you get them behind your head? Or do they actually tilt forward a little bit and that's where you stop, okay? Now I want you to imagine that you're doing a behind the neck shoulder press. If you've got the strength to flick them back with ease, you could do a fully frontal plane press. No problem. If your arms are very internally rotated, you're very stiff, you're very tight, then yeah, that is going to absolutely wreck your shoulders if you try to do a behind the neck shoulder press. Now, in my opinion, not my opinion, this is fact really. If you can't do these movements, then don't do them. But these are not inherently risky movements. If you've got the mobility for them, they are great because your body will adapt to the stress that you put on it. If you get stronger in certain positions, great. And that includes those risky ones because that means that day-to-day activities will not be able to mess you up. If you need better ankle mobility, you better be working on that because obviously, therefore, your ankles, your knees, your hips, everything plays downstream. So if your ankles are unstable, your upper leg will move a little bit differently. Your hips can hurt at the bottom of the squat as a result of your ankle mobility. Everything plays into each other. Everything has a knock-on effect. So the importance is build strength in different ranges, in different positions. And part of that is periodizing your training. So long-term, think about what your training looks like, okay? A lot of people have very weak lower traps. This is something that doesn't get a lot of direct love in our training. But if all you're doing in terms of lateral raises is side lateral raises, if you've never done a Y raise, which does create a little bit of tension, it does actually align the force a little bit with your lower traps, then naturally you're never going to get the strength to really carry over to any other movements where that will be important. So you're going to want to ensure that through different training phases, you have different exercises that are in there that are going to cover the bases. In that particular context, that's an important part of that overhead stability and the ability to press behind the neck, for example. But it means that anything that comes up in day-to-day life is not going to derail you because you have actually built serious strength in those positions with a lot more weight. That the kind of weight that you'd be using day-to-day is not going to really have much of an impact. A great example is the lower back. So many people are scared to do deadlift variations because they have a dodgy lower back. Well, how do you expect it to ever not be dodgy if you don't strengthen it? And how do you expect to strengthen it if you keep ignoring your deadlifts? So all of this is important. You need to have a degree of risk as long as it's managed, as long as it's implemented in a way that actually, regresses you to where you're at. The training plan needs to meet you. If you can progress it from there, then that is how you're going to build great mobility with your resistance training. And the key to that is understanding that we can't go full throttle on everything at once. So think about what do you want to prioritize this training phase? And then what little tweaks can you make to the exercise selection in the phases that follow so that over the year, you're ticking all the boxes. And then finally, we're talking about joint health. And one of the biggest things to talk about here is this idea of inertia. Now, inertia is not something to be demonized. It's not something we're trying to get away from, but it's important that we know how to manage it. Now, the example that I want to use is something like a pendulum squat. I want you to imagine this like a seesaw. Okay, so I want you to imagine that on the end of the seesaw is 20 kilos. Now, if I go to the end of the seesaw and I try to pick it up, that's going to be a lot easier for me to pick up than if I were to go to the middle of the seesaw and try to lift it up from there. Okay, the seesaw effect, those idea of moment arms. Now, on a pendulum squat, if you've ever used one, you know that the weight sits right at the end of the pendulum and you're sitting a little bit closer to that point of rotation, which is why most people cannot get a lot of weight on a pendulum squat compared to most other lower body pressing movements. Now, the key thing here is understanding the speed at which the weight is going at. A lot of people don't like biomechanics because they say that it's overcomplicating lifting. But the key thing about biomechanics is that lifting is putting force through your anatomy. If you don't understand how forces work, you don't understand basic year 10 physics, and you're just waiting for an accident to happen with your training. So, speed equals distance over time, right? Which means that if we think about an arc, now I want you to think about a racetrack. Naturally, the person on the outer lane of that 400-meter track is going to run a little bit longer than the person on the inside of that track. There's a longer arc, a longer circle that they have to go around, okay? The same happens on the pendulum squat. That weight, when it swings around through that big arc, in the same amount of time, that 3 seconds that you're doing the eccentric to go down to the bottom, the same time that your knee is going through a certain range of motion, in that same amount of time, that weight is moving a much greater distance, longer, further out on that arm, okay? It's drawing a bigger circle. So if speed equals distance over time, if the same amount of time something is covering a greater distance, that means it's moving faster, okay? Basically just rearranging that equation. So the speed is greater of that weight, okay? So I want you to now imagine that you don't, control the eccentric or use something like banding, okay? The law of inertia, Newton's first law, an object in motion will want to stay in motion. So an object that's accelerating will continue to want to accelerate. An object that is still will take more force to get moving. So if you've got a weight that's moving very, very fast, you're going to have to put in a lot of force to stop it moving. It means that amount of force going through your knees at the bottom of that lift, if you have to quickly decelerate it compared to if you were to control it down, is going to have very different properties on your joints. This is why on leg presses, hack squats, you will often see people putting bands around it to actually lift the weight off them at the bottom of the movement. That band is helping to not only reduce the amount of weight, but it's actually helping to slow the weight down, so the property of inertia. So that there are things that we can do, including things like reverse banding, to actually help you alleviate some of the pressure on your joints and improve the longevity of your resistance training. Now, all of this, of course, underpinned by the fact that you need a plan that works around your lifestyle, that works around the long hours, that is flexible, so that even if you miss a workout, as is going to happen when you are a career-focused man, you need a plan that encompasses all of that for you. You want a plan that's effective, that works in the longevity, all the science that we've talked about, but you want it done in a way that's super simple. You know exactly what you need to do. You want to do the few things that really move the needle and just do those effective exercises. If you want to work with me, I've helped many career-focused men of varying ages, even up to their 50s, continue to progress and get in incredible shape and manage their health, creating an incredible quality of life. If that interests you, then of course feel free to DM me Lean on Instagram, and we can chat a little bit more to see if you'd be the right fit for our Pinnacle program. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you've been able to take some value from this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.